Good morning. I'm Jim Rooney, President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to today's Government Affairs Forum. We seem to be turning a corner and in a period of hope as the weather gets better and the news on the COVID seems to be getting better, although recent news of some plateauing leaves us with some concern. It's been a very difficult year for our community and indeed the entire world, but I know that we'll come out of this stronger than we entered a year ago. It was just a year ago that we actually had to cancel the appearance of then Speaker Robert DeLeo. It was one of the first events that we canceled and shifted to an all virtual format. So what better way to highlight this entry into our new beginnings than to hear from our new Speaker of the House, Ron Mariano, in his first major public speech in his role as Speaker of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Before we get started, I'd like to begin by giving a huge thank you to our sponsor, Bank of America, a long-standing partner in our Government Affairs Forum series. I want to thank the entire team at Bank of America for their support and enabling us to bring this content to the business community, but especially Michal Chamberlain, the Managing Director for Global Markets and Massachusetts President of Bank of America, and Brian Grip, one of our key partners here at the Chamber, a Senior Vice President at Bank of America and Public Policy Executive, who's not only a tremendous asset to Bank of America, but to the Chamber as well, and to the entire business community thinking about complex pieces of legislation. Thank you, Michal and Brian, for all you do. And a big thank you to our friends at Comcast who help bring these government affairs programs to a wider audience, including making this event available via on demand. I want to note for everybody that today's event is being recorded and will be shared on the Chamber's YouTube page in the coming weeks. The program today will be, I will introduce Speaker Mariano. He will make some remarks. We'll come back and have a conversation. And we hope that you will participate in that conversation by utilizing the chat and Q&A functions during today's conversation. So with that, I'm honored to introduce today's guests. We're joined today by the Honorable Ronald J. Mariano. Speaker Mariano has represented the 3rd Norfolk District in the Massachusetts House of Representatives since 1991. And he was elected Speaker of the House just 4 months ago in December of 2020 after serving as Majority Leader for 9 years. The Speaker's top priorities in his new role are continuing to bolster the state's COVID-19 pandemic response and position Massachusetts for a sustainable long-term economic recovery. Speaker Mariano, I could not agree with you more on that priority. The Chamber and the entire business community look forward to working closely with you and your team on the future of Boston and Massachusetts. And with that, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Ronald Mariano.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you to the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce for the invitation to speak with you all today. Every year, the Chamber invites the Speaker of the House to provide its members with insight on the House's legislative agenda and a preview of the upcoming state budget. Since I'm in my 2nd term as Speaker of the House, my first term only lasting a week, and I didn't get to give a speech in my first term. I'm happy to be here as I begin my 2nd and my first full term. Of course, this gathering is taking place under entirely different circumstances. Even as our vaccination effort continues and we grow more hopeful for the future, we're still 1 year into a global pandemic. You know, these events, I used to have a little fear and trepidation about the Speaker coming to speak to the Chamber, because it always seemed to result in me heading up a new commission or a new charge, trying to fulfill a commitment that Speaker DeLeo had made to the chamber. And it highlighted to me the important relationship that we can have with the chamber in moving public policy. But these virtual events are becoming sadly too familiar. After a year of physical distancing and connecting over screens and conference calls. But these connections matter. While the State House remains closed to the public, the work of the House of Representatives continues. I welcome opportunities to engage with the business community, both in formal settings like this forum and during your regular advocacy efforts. When I was elected Speaker by my colleagues, I promised to make an intentional effort to increase diversity within leadership roles. The result is a more diverse leadership team, 18 new committee chairs, and experienced leaders returning to chair different committees. With that comes a natural energy that is generating new excitement in the House for this session. And it couldn't have come at a better time. The challenges state government faces cannot be overstated. That's why I'm so grateful to have a close partner in the Senate and President Karen Spilka. To confront these challenges and to seize opportunities to recover stronger than ever. The House will rely on the work of lawmakers with different lived experiences and is prepared to embrace innovative approaches to long-standing issues. The turmoil of the Trump presidency ignited a wave of grassroots activism that has brought new urgency to progress on key issues affecting our health, our climate, and our economic security. Too often, pundits paint business interests as being at odds with that progress. But I know that you can be part of the solution. Businesses have been devastated by this pandemic and by the public health restrictions put in place to stop the further spread of the virus. The vacant storefronts in downtowns across the Commonwealth are reminders that small businesses power our local economies. And for every for lease sign hanging in the window, there are dozens of lost jobs and displaced workers. The House of Representatives understands the ripple effect that the failure and success of local businesses has on the wider economy. And the legislature has taken consistent action to help support businesses and workers since the beginning of the pandemic. Most recently, the House passed legislation to prevent a steep increase in unemployment insurance rates and to provide tax relief for recipients of federal payroll protection program loans. These measures will save businesses from unexpected financial demands at a critical time in our economic recovery. We've also offered paid sick leave to workers to get vaccinated and tax relief for certain recipients of unemployment insurance benefits. As a matter of fact, the House and Senate are meeting later today to enact this important legislation and send it to Governor Baker for his signature. Back in the early months of lockdown, we passed an eviction moratorium that protected small businesses from eviction. We also allowed virtual notarization to ensure important legal transactions could continue despite physical distancing requirements. And we passed legislation to delay the income tax filing deadline twice. We've helped restaurants by allowing for to-go purchases of mixed drinks and limiting fees charged by third-party delivery services. Our economic development bill also authorized bonding of up to $20 million to provide restaurants with COVID-19 recovery grants. In that same legislation, we also authorized over $102 million in spending on local economic development projects. This funding came on top of millions more in targeted initiatives to help jumpstart the economy, including support for small businesses, workforce retention initiatives in the tourism industry. These bonding authorizations and additional funds appropriated in the state budget were crucial to ensuring a strong and equitable economic recovery. And we made these investments at a time of unprecedented fiscal uncertainty. During the early days of the pandemic, experts predicted revenue losses of anywhere from $4 to $6 billion. But the final FY21 budget not only avoided drastic service cuts and program closures, but showed growth over FY20. We did this while also investing in key pandemic response programs to provide housing relief, to support small businesses, and to stabilize our cities and towns. These gains were possible due to stronger than expected revenue collections and Federal CARES Act funding in our many years of fiscally responsible leadership that produced a record high balance of $3.5 billion in our rainy day fund. As we turn our attention to the upcoming FY22 budget, I can report that we're approaching sunnier days, but the rain clouds still loom in the distance. The House is planning for a normal budget calendar, which means that debate will start in late April. Our consensus revenue agreement reflects 3.5% revenue growth. We continue to be encouraged by promising revenue numbers. This includes a substantial increase in February 2021 collections over last year, amounting to more than $372 million above the revised monthly benchmark. While these figures give us cause for optimism, we need to remember that many of the most important tax collection months remain on the horizon. As we learned last year, surpluses can quickly turn to deficits in this age of coronavirus. But we also have good fiscal news coming from the federal government. Thanks to the Biden-Harris administration and our congressional delegation, we estimate that Massachusetts will receive over $4.5 billion from the American Rescue Plan, with an additional $3.4 billion going directly to cities and towns. These funds represent a multi-year opportunity to manage our virus response, to promote a just economic recovery, and to begin to envision what our new normal will look like. Such an unprecedented deposit of federal funds spanning multiple years will require additional process and special consideration. Part of that enhanced process will begin next Tuesday, when the House's new Committee on Federal Stimulus, chaired by Chairman Dan Hunt, has its first hearing. We are incredibly grateful, and I am happy to announce that the Biden-Harris administration has graciously offered to send the Deputy Director of the National Economic Council to next week's hearing to brief the House on the American Rescue Plan and what it means for the recovery of our economy. The legislature is committed to understanding the resources available and the needs of our communities prior to exerting its constitutional authority to appropriate these funds. We must continue to be flexible enough to respond to critical emergencies, while also being prudent enough to invest these funds to address long-standing needs. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we will have to get it right. I'll continue to rely throughout this process on the advice and guidance of Chair Aaron Mikowitz, whose steady fiscal leadership has been so crucial in managing our response and our recovery. But the greatest danger to our long-term fiscal health is becoming over-reliant on federal assistance. While this federal funding may carry our budget for the next year or two, continued stability depends on finding new opportunities for revenue. That reasoning was the cause for the House's urgency last session in passing legislation to legalize sports betting in Massachusetts, which could bring more than $50 million of annual revenue to the state. I continue to support sports betting that creates in-person and mobile gaming licenses that will bolster existing casinos and racing facilities. Our legislation will also correct the unacceptable result of the current legal landscape, which forbids a homegrown business like DraftKings from offering its product within its own borders. DraftKings was created here, they've stayed here, and they've grown here. It's time Massachusetts allows them a future here. This past year has been defined by tragedy in terms of human life lost to this virus and by the immeasurable loss caused by social isolation, deferred plans, and delayed progress. But we must define the years to come as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine our society and to improve the way we live. Step one in that process, and my first priority, is to get people back to working meaningful jobs and promising careers. With thousands of unemployed residents, now is the time to act boldly to pursue the jobs that will power the future of the Massachusetts economy. The United States is on the cusp of an offshore wind energy revolution, and Massachusetts should lead the way. Now, with the help of a presidential administration that embraces clean energy, Massachusetts' first offshore wind project is set for final approval in the coming weeks. The 800 megawatt Vineyard Wind project was made possible by our 2016 clean energy legislation. It will power 400,000 homes, reduce electricity rates, and create 3,600 jobs by the time it is projected to be operational in 2023. And that's just the start. We continue to grow our capacity. In landmark legislation passed again just last week, we increased our offshore wind energy procurement requirements by 2,400 megawatts for a total of 5,600 megawatts. The south coast of Massachusetts has the potential to be a hub of wind energy for the region. We must act decisively to realize that potential. But we cannot be successful if we don't have the infrastructure or the skilled workers needed to support the industry. That is why the House's budget will commit $10 million to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to prioritize the job training programs that will supply the imminent offshore wind construction boom. Carrying on the work of the Green Recovery Task Force, I have also asked Chairman Jeff Roy to combine his unique legislative experiences as a former chair of the Higher Ed Committee and the current chair of the Energy Committee to explore ways to improve our wind energy workforce pipeline going forward. Massachusetts was ahead of its time when we funded the construction of the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal, the only port dedicated exclusively to offshore wind construction. But our competitors are catching up. If we want to maintain our edge in this fast-growing industry, we must continue to invest in our port infrastructure. I will work this session to authorize a large-scale bonding effort to establish the south coast of Massachusetts as a regional hub of the offshore wind energy industry. It was not too long ago that Massachusetts made an ambitious investment in another industry, the life sciences. Now the Boston area is known the world over for its biopharmaceutical innovations, and it's home to a company that has brought us one of the pandemic-ending vaccines. We must pursue the same strategy to make Massachusetts the leader of our clean energy future. Offshore wind is just one example of an industry that is currently limited by our inability to match employers with skilled workers. For decades, we've talked about the importance of reemployment of displaced workers, job readiness programs, and the need to better align these programs with our workforce needs. I believe that a comprehensive skill credentialing system will help us solve this persistent problem. Skill credentialing provides a standardized way to verify that a person has achieved competency in a particular skill. Gone are the days when workers will shop resumes to potential employers listing just their job history and work experiences. Employers want to know what skills a candidate has, and job seekers want to feel empowered by what they can bring to the table. This will take the guesswork out of the hiring process and will give workers a type of education that fit their needs. Traditional degree programs don't work for everyone. Skill credentialing has a promise of providing living wages and strong careers for those that choose not to go to a 2 or 4 year college. If we do nothing, people will seek these educational opportunities from a patchwork of unregulated online providers. A skill credentialing system will also benefit our highly educated workforce, whose careers in cutting-edge fields demand continued refinement of their skills. We are living in the age of acceleration, where the rate of progress in science and technology and our increase in connectivity outpace our ability to keep up. Skill credentialing is a way of recognizing and rewarding this need to be a lifelong learner. But that also means we must ensure there is equitable access to the channels that convey all this information and opportunities. Before the pandemic hit, many of us believed broadband access and the lack of high-speed internet was a problem confined to the most rural corners of our state. But our dependence on the internet to work, to go to school, and stay connected during the pandemic has shown a spotlight on the lack of access by many in our most densely populated urban centers. I'm committed to increasing broadband affordability across the board. And we can do that by encouraging competition and subsidizing access for low-income residents. These are ambitious goals, and much will depend on our financial reality. But they are goals I believe I share with the business community. When I asked my colleagues for their support to become Speaker, I had a simple message: my door is open. I promised them that I would be a willing partner with an open mind. I asked that the business community extend that same approach to me and each of the 160 members of the House as we continue to work together to overcome the challenges facing Massachusetts. Thank you, and I look forward to our continued partnership.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And boy, thank you for hitting on so many issues that are indeed important to the business community and our economic recovery. I mean, the UI bill, the sports betting, your bold statement on wind energy, workforce skills and skills credentialing, internet access. I mean, so many issues that we have in common. So thank you for hitting on all of those as part of your agenda. I wanted to start by picking up on a comment you made in your opening about having a close partner in the Senate in Karen Spilka. You know that many state house watchers take a look when the governor's office changes, or the speaker, or the Senate president, to see what the chemistry is going to be like. And it seems that you and Senate President Spilka have deliberately sent a message of cooperation and collaboration. As you think about that Golden Dome leadership triangle, talk about the working relationship with the Senate President and the Governor's office.
Well, obviously, being the newest member of the triumvirate, I finished up the first of my short terms at the end of the week with a flurry of conference committees and legislation, working very closely with the Senate President, in which we both articulated our views of getting things done cooperatively was far more important than having winners and losers. That the results, with the results, it is credit for everybody. The governor is the third wheel in this tricycle, and he has worked very effectively. The pandemic, there is no blueprint for how to handle a pandemic. He used his executive powers, I think, extremely well at the beginning. A few hiccups on the vaccine roll-up, a few problems since then, but all in all, he's been a willing partner as we trial and error our way through this whole pandemic situation. So.
Right. Mr. Speaker, the country's experienced two horrific acts of gun violence over the past 2 weeks in Georgia and in Colorado most recently. Our hearts go out to the families of the victims, and we stand in solidarity, as I know you do, with the Asian American community. Last night, you chose to use your platform as Speaker to make a public statement, and I'll read it. President Biden is right. We must continue to work to avoid the recurring tragedies. Federal legislation is overdue. Tell me why you chose to speak out on federal action on gun control. And I know that we have among the strongest state restrictions on gun ownership. Is there more that can be done at the state level?
Well, obviously, the need is for a policy nationally, and obviously it would be a lot easier if we could get the Congress to take an action similar to the action that we took here, where we did ban assault rifles, we did ban the big magazines, and I think we have one of the most effective gun laws in the nation. Having worked on the conference committee that delivered that to the governor at the time, I'm extremely proud of our legislation. That's not to say that we can't do better. And I think we see the tragedies almost weekly now of a national sort of avoidance of the issue. And it needs to be focused at a national level. So each state can do their part, but I really call for a national plan to at least do what we did.
Yeah. Well, hopefully your voice and those of others will be heard in Washington, and we can avoid these tragedies going forward. I want to thank you and the legislature for your responsiveness to the needs of the business community and the residents during the COVID crisis. You highlighted many of those in your remarks, that the legislature has been able to pivot and act quickly when we needed help on different things. You mentioned there's lots of money coming in from the CARES Act, the state government, for cities and towns, for public transportation, for childcare, for education, and more. And I was glad that you mentioned setting up the new committee led by Dorchester's own Dan Hunt to get it right, I think is the phrase you used. I want to dig a little deeper on that, because with so much money coming in, how can we make sure that we don't look back in 2 or 3 years with disappointment on how that money was spent? And you set up this committee. What's the role of the legislature?
Well, the very first role is to work with the federal folks that are coming in explaining how the money can be spent, what monies are specifically targeted to what specific areas, whether or not there are components of any award that we have to match. There's a lot of the details that through the CARES Act that we were unaware of. And we want to make sure that we understand all those things before we start to even think about spending the money. We're going to do our budget in April without factoring in any of this federal money. This federal money is going to be used to try and to fill in some of the things that were left out because we had to divert money for pandemic and coronavirus treatments. And we're also going to very carefully spend this money trying to improve some of the things that I talked about. I think credential training is very, very important as we try and get folks placed in new jobs using some of the skills they may have already or some of the skills that they can develop fairly quickly so that we get people back to work in meaningful jobs. And that to me is where the money should be well spent. That's how we're going to recover. If we bake the money into the budget, after the 2 years, the money's gone, and we're not going to see this amount of money, at least in my time as Speaker. I doubt very rarely I'd get another bite at this apple. So we're going to make sure we spend it wisely.
A follow-up on that, some of the early reports on the distribution of CARES Act or American Rescue Plan monies to cities and towns have suggested that some of the hardest hit and most needy cities and towns have not received sort of the kind of money that you would think that those hardest hit would get. How can you work with the Senate to ensure that the hardest hit cities and towns are getting the necessary aid?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. We've identified a few towns. We're not even sure how many towns have been shortchanged in this formula. They used a formula which probably is not applicable to giving out this money. So we've worked with the governor and the Senate, and we will continue to work with them to identify all the towns, not just the couple that were in the paper, but there are more towns that have been identified as being shortchanged. So we want to get a complete picture of who is shortchanged using this formula, which we think really didn't apply to the needs for the money. So it's a work in progress, and we've identified, I think, 3 or 4 towns already, but we think there are more.
Great. Both of us made mention in our comments about, working in this virtual environment, and there's so much activity and bills filed in the legislature each session, and now many of them are quite worthy. We have a question from the audience about what's your advice to advocates, to individuals to try to get their bill noticed or try to advance legislation that they're in favor of or supporting, especially in this virtual world?
It is a lot more challenging in the virtual world. It's challenging for all of us. I mean, normally you and I would be eating rubbery eggs now and stale bacon, but instead we're here. But I do think there is an opportunity for folks to weigh in. We are still functioning the way we always function. There will be committee hearings. The chairman of the committee will accept testimony, whether it be on a Zoom or on a phone call. They will accept written testimony. It will get a hearing. All of the members have phones in their office and at home, and can be reached and can discuss bills with any of the advocates that feel they need to make a point. So with that, I think that it'll be a little different for a while, But the hope is, as we progress through the summer, that maybe by the fall, we can begin to open this building and start to have some hearings and get people in to testify and make their points.
So take advantage of the virtual hearings. That
Yeah, you know, we haven't slowed down. We've still processed bills. I'm sure we'll have over 6,000 bills again this year, which is about our average, between 6,000 and 7,000. So it's a lot of paper to move.
Yeah.
But this system, and a lot of this credit goes to Kate Hogan, who worked very hard to set up this virtual system that we have. And it's worked. It allows us to do some very important pieces of legislation. The climate bill, done virtually, is a testament to the hard work of the membership here in the House and the Senate. To hear testimony, to listen to the advocates, to draft the bill, have a debate on it, and get it passed is pretty remarkable in this pandemic.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about education. You mentioned the connection between, people having the skills for 21st century economy and your goals to get people back to work and into jobs and so forth. Of course, it starts, with elementary and secondary education. The board voted to bring back pre-K through grade 5, back to in-person learning 5 days a week starting in April. Some cities and towns have requested delays, including Boston. What do you think about the reopening of schools? What do you think is needed for districts to feel ready to reopen schools? And maybe a second part to that question is, a lot of our children have had almost a lost year. I mean, what do you think about trying to recapture that? Not just reopen, but, get our kids back on track?
It's a real challenge, Jim. And I think to answer the first part of the question, the virus didn't hit uniformly across the Commonwealth. Different cities and towns were more adversely impacted than others. And I think it should be a decision made by the school committee and the administration of the cities and towns in which the school systems operate as to whether or not they can safely guarantee the children's education. I think that's the first, and I think the governor tried to allow for that with this whole waiver program. The evidence, the science says that it shouldn't be a problem, but there are some people who are uncomfortable. And until the vaccine is spread out enough that we really feel confident that teachers are going to be safe, I think there's an issue of teacher safety. But all of these things are local decisions. And I think you say that the governor sort of built in the opportunity for places that really didn't feel they were ready to opt out. Now, the second part of that is I totally agree that for many students, this is a lost year. We have some plans for extended summer schools to see if we can get some of these kids back into group settings over the course of the summer, prepare them for learning. I know there's even a bill about extending a person's term through high school an extra year. So there are a number of legislative things that have been filed that we will discuss, and they may present an opportunity to extend a school year or extend a person's tenure in high school. It's extremely unfair to have a high school senior who's trying to get off to college and is going through the college selection process to be doing it all virtually. It's a real challenge.
Mr. Speaker, a question in the chat on your perspective on legislation and regarding anti-Semitism, anti-Asian, anti-Black, Hispanic, and other forms of hate and hate crimes in society. And you mentioned in your opening how you intentionally wanted to create a House of Representatives that was inclusive, and society is marked by events like the shooting in Atlanta of 6 Asian Americans, and more recently and locally, anti-Semitic football plays and the Duxbury football team. I mean, all sorts of sort of micro acts of aggression or big acts of aggression. And I know you can't legislate sort of people's feelings and hatred, but what do you think is the role of the legislature in this moment in which we've got a racial reckoning going on?
Well, I was extremely disturbed by the Hingham situation. As an educator, as a former teacher and a coach, I can't understand how any adult could allow that to happen under their watch. I find that to be very, very upsetting. And I think we need to do a better job in talking to our kids. And it is about the kids, it's about the young generation. There's a lot of folks out there we're not going to get to. We certainly can't legislate them to change their behavior, but we got to start with the kids. They have to be made more aware of our differences. I come from a district in Quincy. I can walk from the house I grew up in to a synagogue, to a Catholic church, to a mosque, and to a Buddhist temple, all within walking distance from my house. We need to make people aware of our differences and learn to accept the differences. It is frustrating to me that in this day and age, we have adults that tacitly approve the race. I guess it's a religious baiting more than race baiting, but whatever you would call that, the anti-Semitism that occurred in England. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I
don't have a silver bullet to change behaviors, but I do think it begins with the next generation. And for these kids, these high school kids, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, to accept that, it's very disturbing.
Yeah. I think you said Hingham, Mr. Speaker, but I think it was in Duxbury, right?
Duxbury, I'm sorry, I apologize to Hingham.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Speaker, and for your leadership on that issue. You've mentioned you're from Quincy, a community heavily dependent on tea service. Let's talk about the tea. You know I like to do that. Why don't we just sort of ask a broad question? Give us your assessment of the state of the tea as we enter this reopening period.
Well, obviously, I was very disappointed to see the tea was taking these unilateral steps to cut routes and service. They cut the ferry, and ferry was very important to Quincy and other communities along the South Shore. So that was disturbing, but I was also there when Congressman Lynch, in no uncertain terms, expressed his disappointment with the tea, accepting all this federal money and still going forward with these cuts. And you see the tea backing down. We need to do a real cost-benefit analysis of the routes they want to cut. The tea has, for an awful long time, shut down routes that were fairly heavily traveled to get our attention to vote for fare increases and to make other changes. We need to really go in and analyze what kind of system we want to have. We want to analyze if there are going to be any changes in people's work patterns and travel patterns, that's something that we may have to deal with, and the TV is going to have to deal with. So there is a lot of changes potentially on the horizon. And I think that before we have any serious discussions about routes and, cutting deficits, and, we have to do a better job on what kind of system we want and what kind of system we're going to need going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we wholeheartedly agree with you, Mr. Speaker. And, I think as we all reflect on the reopening and, the path forward, I think we need a renewed focus on the T and examining its purpose as a public good and a public service, helping us out of this recovery, and helping people get back to work. And we know that patterns are going to change, but the T has got to be there for us. And I know you know that.
The other point that gets lost in the shuffle, Jim, is our frontline workers, the folks that served us during this pandemic and risks their own personal health to work in a supermarket or to work in the corner store. They're the ones that are taking the T. There's no one in the financial district. Well, I shouldn't say no one, but you get my point.
I do get your point. And, we're fond of saying that as the T does that kind of analysis, it's not always just about how many people are riding, it's who is riding.
Yes.
To your point. And, people going to work at the hospitals early in the morning, or as you say, frontline workers, just have to rethink sort of their role in our economy and in our recovery, I think. So thank you for those comments. I wanted to get a little specific on it. Last year, the House approved some transportation legislation that included an increase in the gas tax. Senate Transportation Committee Chair Boncory released his transportation plan that included an increase in the gas tax. Are you open to a discussion on raising revenues for transportation in the form of?
I think it's a little premature just yet. I wouldn't rule anything off the table. I think it's interesting that the senator decided we needed revenues, but we knew that a year ago, and I think that now with this federal money coming in, it's a chance for us to sort of take a step back and sort of recalculate what we want the T to look like. I think that is probably the biggest thing to me. This is an opportunity to reset. We're not going to have $2.25 billion over the next 2 years again, for a total of 4.5. We're not going to get this opportunity. We have to, any changes we make, we have to make sure will serve us well going forward, and because we're not going to get the restart again. Just that simple.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about healthcare. More than, as long as I've known you, and probably more than any legislator I've known, you have been at the forefront of healthcare policy in Massachusetts, right down to the details, a champion of the community hospitals and healthcare throughout the Commonwealth. The times we've spoken, you've always made a point to talk about access to healthcare, for everybody in the state. Talk about your thoughts and agenda for the coming year in the healthcare field area.
We're in interesting times in healthcare. We're starting to see some mergers and some acquisitions and some partnerships that are kind of surprising. But through it all, I think one of the things we have to remember is the community hospitals serve a role in our gateway city. They're the largest employers usually. They're the economic engines for the city most of the time. Having lost the city hospital, I can testify to the impact it has on the economy of the city. And in the last healthcare bill we're trying a different approach to help fund community healthcare by putting a 5% surcharge on the services they provide to public payers. Now, if this can work, because I've tried twice to find a mechanism to fund community healthcare, community health hospitals, and it hasn't worked. I'll be the first to admit it hasn't worked. I think this has an opportunity of working, and I'm anxious. It's a 2-year test. The end of 2 years, we'll evaluate if we've really helped community hospital budgets to expand, to make some improvements so that they can provide the quality care at a lower cost. Key with community hospitals has to provide quality care, and it has to be a lower cost. We can't all line up and go to Mass General. It's not going to work. We have to have access in our cities and towns, especially in our gateway communities.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your leadership on that issue. One of the other, key elements of reopening is childcare and access to childcare. We look at people that have either unemployed or dropped out of the workforce, and disproportionately it's women. And when you dig deeper on why, it comes down to the childcare issue. As we reopen the economy, I know the legislature has done some great things, both in the House and Senate. As we reopen the economy, where's childcare on your radar?
It's moving to the forefront because it is an issue in reopening. It really, and the governor has recognized that and put forth a plan to both the Senate President and I on some restructuring and some new visions about how to deal with early child care. I think the proof is in the pudding as the plan advances, as we begin to see what changes are real and what changes are just theory. We'll be able to make some decisions. But I do think you're spot on in recognizing that as a key. And it is a key that we're going to have to deal with. You know, hopefully, if we can make some changes, some of the federal money may help as we restructure the issue around changes in working hours, changes in the amount of days that people come into town or leave home. But still, the ultimate problem is wages of folks who work in the industry. They're extremely low-paid positions, and it's a problem.
Yeah, it is, and we look forward to working with you on that. You know, the business community is equally concerned about their workforce being able to return and how that's all going to unfold. I wanted to ask you a sort of a legislative process question, given all your experience. And you know, we see in Washington different legislative tactics being used, and then on the state level, as we watch, you know, different advocates use tactics like ballot questions to create legislation. And now, without getting into sort of what it's for, the use of the Constitutional Convention to actually sort of put what we think of as legislative policy into our Constitution that is, you know, now hard to reverse, right? Once it's in there. So, I mean, you're a pro. You know all of the ins and outs of how legislation works. You know, talk about use of those tactics, whether it's ballot questions or the con to sort of do legislative work. It
really bypasses the whole spirit of the legislature. It bypasses compromise. It bypasses the ability to work for a better product on the issue. And it's very frustrating for us. As you said, if it passes and it's baked into the Constitution, it's very, very difficult to change it. It's a process that's used by people who are frustrated because their positions may be too extreme to get enough support to get a bill through the House. So they resort to a sort of, I call it an end run around the legislature. And that's in effect what it is. So
Yeah.
it is frustrating for us too. I mean, I'd love to be able to sit down, and I know what we're talking about here, to have a discussion of tax policy. But instead we have this or nothing, and it's a difficult choice for legislators.
Yeah. Well, you and I got some people together a couple of years ago on paid family leave, and
yeah, which is really
we worked that out.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a model. Mr. Speaker,
it needs to happen. I mean, people have to talk to each other.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, one closing comment. I'm, going to ask you to look into your crystal ball and talk about your hopes, your vision for the next year, and how do you see this us coming out of this recovery?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're going to be fine. I think the opportunity that we're going to have to reinvent ourselves a little bit with this federal money is a tremendous opportunity. And I think that we will be fine over the next 2 years if we continue to work to grow our economy separate of the changes we're making with some of this federal money. We're going to be on the road to rebuilding a healthy economy. For me, it's jobs. It's let's get people back to work. Everyone's a lot happier when they have a place to go. Let's get out of the house and go to work. So.
There you go. Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you for taking time today to join us. Thank you for choosing the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce.
Stay out of the box, yeah.
first big speech out of the box. So we appreciate that. And I know that I speak for the entire business community, not just of Boston, but of the Commonwealth, in expressing our desire to work closely with you and support you in this role. So thank you.
You, Jim.
And I want to encourage all of our guests today to visit bostonchamber.com to read more about our policy advocacy efforts and register for upcoming events. We continue to deliver timely and important content to the Greater Boston region during this continued pandemic period. And once again, Mr. Speaker, thank you, and thank you to our audience. That concludes today's session.